All right, welcome. So today, kind of a different setup. I'm just going to share my laptop screen, and I want to make sure that it's showing what I think it's showing. So I'm going to be looking down at my iPad a lot, but I look down a lot anyways, so you guys are used to that. Okay, so my apologies about the lab last week. Kind of got brushed to the side. Confession time. I managed my time poorly, and I had to go to my mother-in-law's birthday earlier than I thought. And so I didn't get to it. And then I thought, you know what? Let's just do it in class. So hopefully you guys all survived without a new lab, but we're going to do the lab today. So let's see here. And this way we have a little bit more time together too. So I updated our Moodle page. It's going to be like a play-by-play situation here. Okay, so the exploratory analysis in R and Python. There's quite a bit of setup, so that's why it felt weird to just do it without you here, so to speak. Now, I understand that you're probably not set up, so you probably won't be able to follow along. And honestly, it's very difficult to follow along if I'm coding. So my suggestion, or if I'm, typing stuff and just, it's hard to follow along for these types of things. Okay, so I'm not expecting you to do that. But really just kind of sit back and watch what's going on and trust that there is a video afterwards, so you're safe. Okay, so I made a folder of the exploratory data analysis stuff. Now it includes the RMD file as well as the PDF. To generate the PDF, you're going to need the screenshot, and so that's why that's there. But if you want to just go from the PDF, that's fine. I'll show you both. Okay, the reason I give you the RMD file is, oh, and I just realized I did not do the transcript. Enable. There. Now it works. Okay, good. Oh yeah, that's what I was saying. So the reason I give you the RMD file as well is not just to save you a bunch of typing, but it's also to give you little clues on how to do stuff. For example, how do I insert an image, for example, in Markdown? How do I insert a hyperlink in Markdown? So I'll show you that. But that's why I give you the PDF as well as the RMD file, so that you can start to make those connections, right? And so I think I've got both of these open already. I do. Okay. So the PDF looks like this. Okay, so there's quite a bit of setup. A lot of it you've already done. Okay, and so let me move the chat over here. It's kind of quiet on the chat, so I'll move it over there. Okay, so these installation instructions, and let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Oh, that's not the one that I wanted to. It's tough on my laptop, but anyways, here we go. Okay. So these installation instructions really only apply if you want to be working on your own computer. So you want to have your own setup. Now, what I find is that it gets a little bit tedious with maintaining updates and that kind of stuff. But once you have everything installed, you can just kind of maintain it. But it takes a little bit of work to get there. Okay, so So if you want to work locally on your computer, so save stuff on your computer, you don't need an internet connection, that kind of thing, then these are the instructions to follow. Otherwise, you can skip ahead. Okay, but you can work in the cloud. It does require internet access, obviously, but you can use RStudio Cloud. Okay, and so RStudio Cloud for just kind of getting up and running is really good because it has everything installed and everything is there. So you don't have to go through all this, all these installs. Okay, so you should have the following installed already. Some copy of R, right? And so whatever version's running, I think it's like Hippie Birdie or something like that, or Bird Hippie or something like that. They always have these cute names, right? In fact, let me check to see what version it is right now. Oh, Bird Hippie. So here you can see what the version name is. The only, I remember a few of them. There was like Pumpkin Patch. That was a long time ago. Those are the only ones I remember right now. But anyways, they have cute names. So I've included the links for those downloads. You should probably have these all set up already, right? Because as far as I know, no one else is using RStudio Cloud, but it is worth checking out if you haven't already. And then of course you need RStudio, there's a link there, and you need some distribution of LaTeX. Okay, and so one thing that I wanted to note here is that it can be a really large download. Okay, so relatively large download. And so if you're working on an older computer, or if you just want to save some space, then you could use RStudio Cloud, which has the LaTeX installed already. Same with Python. Okay. So the one thing that we checked together, I showed you how to check to see if you have Python installed. And if you do, then that's great. Then you don't need to worry about this. But I think most of us probably need to install Python. Okay, and so to install Python, you're going to go to python.org. Okay, and there's a link there. And really easy, just you probably have it installed already. Okay, I don't want to assume that you do, but I think that you might. Okay, so under the download tab, or downloads, I guess it is, so here, okay, then it just prompted me, hey, it looks like you're working on a Mac. Do you want to download Python for Macs? Okay, and so here, oh yeah, so if you are working in the command line or in the terminal, then that's cool, but I am not going to do it because then you're all set, you're fine, you can do it. But I don't want to, because we're data scientists, so we don't need to be able to work in the command line, and it can be really kind of scary. Even for me, it's scary. So that's why I wanted to avoid it. But I am impressed. If you guys are working in the command line, then that's awesome. So I am impressed, don't worry. But all my instructions, as much as I possibly can, I'm going to avoid it, right? Because there are ways around it, but it's way quicker if you can do it in the command line, for sure. So here it just prompted me, and when I clicked download, it just downloaded the installer, and clicking download starts the download. Open the installer and complete the installation. How I do it is I have some very, very, very basic piece of Python code. Okay, and so how I use that, and just to make sure that things are up and running, is I try to run that piece of code. Now, usually, so what I want you to do is try running the code below. Now, let me go switch to the RMD file. So I'm going to switch to RStudio, so not move from the PDF down to my RMD file. Okay. I actually think it's a little bit nicer to look at the RMD file sometimes, right? Markdown is supposed to be a WYSIWYG. A WYSIWYG is a what you see is what you get. And so everything is supposed to sort of look like what it produces later on, okay? So here, this is what we've talked about. And here I've shown you how to insert a PNG. You can use a JPEG or whatever. Mine was just saved as a PNG, so I didn't change it. Okay, so here, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. How about that? Maybe even one more, let's see. Okay, let's see here. Okay. So once it's downloaded the installer, I want you to open the installer and complete the installation. I mean, at this point in your data science career, you should be able to install stuff on your computer. So if you need help, then let me know, but I'm assuming you're good to install stuff. So then, like I was saying, so if you try to run the code below, okay, then notice that this is now a Python, make sure my pointer is there. This is now a Python code chunk, okay? And so it's indicated, it looks like an R code chunk, but now it's saying, hey, here's some Python code actually. So use your Python brain, okay? And so what I did was, all right, if I try running this code, so for example, I can run the current chunk. Okay, let's see if that's going to work for you. So for me, because I already did the install, then it should work. I hope it's thinking. Okay, so here now it worked. But for you, the first time that you run this code, so whether you do command enter or run the current chunk or something, you know, it won't run without installing Python. It didn't for me, at least. If you're on it seems like PCs have Python. Most of them have Python, come with Python, you know, kind of up and running. So it might be more of a Mac issue, but it didn't run for me. So one thing that you could check is you could take this chunk and see if it runs. Now, how you'll know that it's in Python is because now we have 3 carets. So a triple caret, if you will. Right? Whereas if we're working in R, then we only get a single caret. So that's how you're going to be able to tell if you're working in a Python command line environment. Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, if it's already installed, then it will work. Yeah. Yeah, it could be because my laptop is really old and that's why it wasn't installed. It could be because I'm on a Mac and it doesn't seem to come pre-installed as opposed to for a PC, it seems to be installed for most people. So you might have it installed already. How you know is if you run this tiny code chunk, a Python code chunk, then oh yeah, mine was outdated. That was my problem. If it runs, right? So how do you know if it ran? Well, you know that it ran because it's down here in the console. Notice that it's indicating that it's working in Python now and not R anymore, okay? And I'll show you how to switch back. Even though I think it says, you can just type in exit. Oh, I thought, anyways, I'm learning too. Because I installed Reticulate later. Anyways, we'll see. We'll do it all. We'll cover all our bases. I'll show you what I did to make it work. And then as long as you get it working, then I might have done too much, but at least I covered all my bases. Okay, so here, so to exit the Python environment, a couple of things you can do, but it does say you can enter exit or quit to exit and return to R. So here, if you type in exit and then hit enter, now you're back to a single caret. And notice that up here, now it's switched the environment to R. Now for our R code, we haven't run anything, so it doesn't know anything. So the R side of our brain doesn't know anything, but I can click here and I can switch to the Python side of our brain. And the Python side of our brain still knows what A is. Okay, A is a list of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So I'm going to switch back to R, right? But just keep track. You now have two brains, not just the one. Now we have two brains that we're working with, but how they work is going to be similar, right? And so our goal, or my goal for the labs, is for you to see, okay, here's how I can do it in R, but I can also do it in Python. And we're going to make those match, and we're just going to pick apart the code that we have from the textbook. Okay, which is easier said than done. I know it sounds really easy, but I think what you'll find is that there's a lot to kind of pick apart here. So let's keep going. So now, just to show that it's working, what if I just go to the Python? So now I'm in another Python code chunk and I just want to know what's the length of A. Okay, so if I run that, it switches back to Python, right? So I had been in Python and then I switched to R and now I switched back to Python. So we can switch back and forth, but the brain needs to know where to go to do stuff, okay? Do I go to R or do I go to Python? Okay, so then the length of A is 6, which is true, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, length of 6. Okay. Looks like my fingers are blue. Anyways, okay, so now try some R code, right? Let's do the same thing in R. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to call A. A is a list of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm going to look at the length of A, and it's going to do the same thing. But notice here that this is now an R code chunk. Okay. And one thing that I do want to say here is, although we're going to work through these, right? As long as you have a good handle on one of these methods, right? So whether that's R or whether that's Python, for me, that's going to be R, right? I work in R all the time, and R is kind of like my happy place, right? But it is fun to kind of see the connections between R and Python. But as long as you know one of the two, then that's good, right? We don't need to know how to do things 3 different ways. right? Although it's fun, right? And so, so now if I work with our code, notice there's some slight differences in how it takes values. For example, how do I put in a list of values? In R, we use the concatenate, right? Whereas in Python, we had these square brackets. Fair enough. Okay. I don't know if it uses the assigning operator equal to always, or if we can use an arrow. I'm not sure, something to look into. But anyways, if I run this R code, then I can run the current code chunk. And just as a side note, right, when I hit this run current chunk, that's not usually how I run code, right? I'm only hitting this little play button so that you can see what I'm doing, because usually I would just have my cursor on the line that I want to run and then command enter and then command enter, but you can't see what I'm doing, right? And so this feels really clunky and not something that you should be doing, right? You should be kind of shortcutting your way through this code. But I guess the play button's there for a reason, so it's fine. Notice how it switched, right? It switched back to our code because it knew that there was our code here. Good. So that's how we make sure that kind of the basic installs are done. Okay. Next thing I want you to do, and this is just so we're going to be using GitHub, not for today. It felt like too much. And I've never used GitHub in a class before. And it's been a long time since I used it myself. I got lazy, I guess. And so I'm going to need to brush up on some skills, but they are skills that we need and should have. So I do think it's going to be really important, especially if you're working together as a team on code, then you should be using Git and GitHub, and probably GitHub, but Git. And all the fun word plays that we can use Git for. So if you go to github.com, you can create an account if you don't already have one, okay? And so for now, we're gonna use GitHub in the future, okay? But for now, all I want you to do is sign up for an account, okay? Later, I'll send you an invitation to join my organization, which will be our class, but I'm putting that off for now, okay? I haven't set the class up yet, so that's why. So there's also a nice kind of, well, it's a hello world exercise that you can work through. So once you sign up for your account, there's all kinds of verifications and stuff like that you'll need to do. And then there's a really nice kind of hello world intro that I'll get you guys to work through, but I might use that as a lab at some point, maybe this week, I don't know. Okay, so I told you that the R code and the Python code is available, right? It's available, we can download it, we can use it. And I'm going to go old school, okay? So just because I want you to just see that you can just bring it down from GitHub, you can bring all that code down, you can download it, and you can have it locally on your own computer, even though we should be working in GitHub, but for now we can do this. So, so if you go to here, okay, I've got the instructions here, but I'm going to show you. Copy. How can I paste? So here is one of the author's GitHub repos. I think it's a repository for the code for this textbook. So what we need to do, or what we want to do, is we want to steal this code because it is open source and we're allowed to do that. And it even says in the textbook that you can go ahead and use this code. You can't reproduce it as if it were your own, right? But as long as you're acknowledging that it's not your code, then that's safe. Okay, so so what you're going to do is you're going to hit this code button, and then one of the options that you have is you can download a zip. Okay, so if you download a zip file, it'll download, and you can move that from your downloads to somewhere safe. And I'm actually going to be working out of that this zip file, or not the zip file, but the file that we downloaded. Felt like a good spot because it has all the data and it has all the code and everything is there. So for me, I move it. So let you in on my personal workflow. Everything that I have that's active at the moment, I have on my desktop. Everything else I move into my documents. So I migrate things into my documents. So for me, I'm always working on my desktop. I work in the cloud, so I know you guys in the terminal. The terminal is way faster and way easier once you understand it and you're not scared of it. But for us muggles, do you guys know what muggles are from Harry Potter? Okay. For us muggles, normal people who are scared of the terminal, we have to go through all these steps. Oh, good. So it sounds like you guys know what muggles are. So good. So then I moved this this zip file that I downloaded. You'll see it here, Practical Statistics for Data Scientists Master. .zip. So when I click it, it just unzips it. You might have to kind of right click unzip or something like that. But anyways, eventually you'll be able to have just the same folder. So a folder of the same name. And if you open that folder, so you'd have to unzip the zip file, obviously. Then there's all kinds of files, and the ones that I added these ones after the fact. Notice that these 3 files are the exact same files that are in the Moodle folder, right? So I just grabbed those from here. And there's lots of different folders, but we're only going to focus on a few of them. So there's a data folder, which has all the data sets. Okay. And so that's good. I didn't check the Docker, but I'm going to skip down to the R folder. And so here you can look at the notebooks, but I'm going to use the code because it seems to be the most basic. So if you hit the code, then the R code for each of the chapters is listed here. So then if you click it, it should open up in RStudio. You might have to force it to open with RStudio because it is just a .r file, right? And so it might go to just the command line R, which is fine, but then you don't have all the bells and whistles of RStudio. So if I go to my RStudio here, then I have that file here. Okay, so everything's looking pretty familiar at this point, right? And so here's all the chapter 1 R code. Okay, so you're not going to have to write anything or very minimal typing of code here. It's more about kind of getting a handle on what the code is doing. Okay, so that's going to be our focus. Okay. Oh yeah, and then the Python code, if you go back to your, there, to the master. If you go to the Python code, when I opened up, and I think I have, oh, I don't. Okay, so I'm gonna click this. It's a Python file, and I think it opens in my LaTeX or as a text file, maybe. No, it opens as LaTeX. That's fine, because here I can still grab all the code that I need. Okay. Good. So you'll be able to have that, and you can play around with it, and you can kind of get jiggy with it. Okay, so notice here I've got those instructions. So to save a personal copy of that folder on your own computer, you have to click the green code button and then select download zip. And then, right, this zip file includes the R code as well as the Python code, among other files, right? There are other things there, such as the data sets and all the other fun stuff. But for us, we're focusing on the R code and the Python code and, of course, the data files. So I've made a couple of notes before we get started, okay? So what you're gonna find is if you open up the exploratory data analysis, for example, right? If it calls on, so if this code that you bring in, if it calls on some library that you haven't installed yet, then R detects that and it says, hey, do you want to install these libraries? And you just go ahead and say yes. Okay, so always install stuff if it prompts you to. It just makes sense. Okay, so always install packages when prompted. So when you add new code that calls on a library that you have not installed yet, RStudio will prompt you to install it. Okay, so just go ahead and install whatever you have to install. Remember, how R works, and Python as well, is we download the smallest possible version of it, and then we bring in libraries as we need them. So that means that we have to install libraries as we go. But once you've installed a library, then it'll always be there, right? Unless you, you know, get some new setup. And sometimes I feel like it's only when I get a new computer that I have to do all those installs again. But now RStudio just kind of detects what you need. So that's going to make it a lot easier. In the past, I had to keep an R script of all the libraries that I've installed in case I need to reinstall them at some point. And it was just a complete nightmare. So you don't have to worry about that, right? And so that's really nice. I wrote this note for you, obviously, but also because of something that I was catching myself doing. So you have to work very methodically, okay, as you work through this code. Otherwise, it's not gonna untangle. Okay, and so what I mean by that is you're going to copy code. So because you have all the code that you need, you're going to copy that code into your file very, very slowly, right? So small pieces at a time. In fact, as much as I've shown you, I just wanted to have you to have it all, right? But I would probably break up all that code, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. But just copy small pieces, right? Just to make sure that you're on the right track, and then knit often, right? So if you, as soon as you're knitting, right, you're just making sure that everything is running properly. It's very, very difficult to go a long time and then go to knit without having an error. And even if you don't have an error, it's really hard and annoying to have to read your whole PDF and just make sure that it was doing what you thought it was doing the whole time, right? And so if you're moving through it with tiny chunks, right, then you're going to be playing it safe in the long run, right? So if you're knitting often and you're just checking, then you can kind of move through and say, okay, I fixed that. That's all good. Moving on to this little piece, right? So for example, we've got code where we talk about, we find the mean of some variable, and then we find the median of some variable, right? I have them all together, but what I would do if I were working through this as a student, I would say, okay, here's my R code for the mean. Here's my Python code for the mean. So just very incrementally. And I'll show you. Make sure that your R output matches the Python output. Now, here's something that the textbook has not been addressing, okay? Because what we're going to find is that the R output is sometimes slightly different from the Python output. Now, those are just due to settings, right? Unless we're doing something weird. But because the textbook only shows the R output, right, then we just assume that they're going to be the same, which is not actually the case. So what I want you to do is, if it doesn't match, I want you to fix it. Okay? Now it's your choice. Do you want your Python code to match your R code, or do you want your R code to match your Python code? One thing that I would say is, for me, I would tend to want to fix my R code to match my Python code. The only reason for that is because I feel more comfortable working in R, right? I feel more comfortable finding solutions in R code than I do with Python code, because it's very unfamiliar to me, right? And so then if I can get my R output to match my Python output, then from my perspective, that's easier, right? But either way, if your output doesn't match, then you have to fix it, okay? And I'll show you. Well, I actually wanted to save one of the fixes. I'm going to leave it to you guys as an exercise, but just remember that if you have to, fix it. I wanted to maybe type something here and add it. Maybe, I'm curious. Change the R code so the output matches the Python, oops, the Python, oh my gosh, output. How about that? Just to be specific. And I'll update the RMD file and the PDF on Moodle. But for now, I'll just have it here. So yeah, let's do that. Let's change the R code so the output matches the Python code. It doesn't actually matter, but just so that we're all talking about the same changes, then it makes more sense for us to focus on changing our R code so that the output matches the Python output. Okay. And because that's what I would do. So it just makes it easier on me. What you'll probably find is that it might be helpful to break up the code and talk about each function individually, right? And also to make notes to yourself about when and how you would use each function, right? And so this is really just a note for yourself. Okay, when would I use the trim mean, for example? How do I use it? What does it do, right? Okay. So our goal for all these labs is to just reproduce the code and the output in both R and Python. In fact, let me add that here. The goal of the labs from moving forward is to reproduce the output shown in the textbook using both R and Python. Pretty simple goal, but it's going to be quite involved. Okay, so I'm not saying that it's going to be easy, right? But once you kind of get the hang of it, then I think you'll start to develop some sort of I don't know, just kind of workflow, right, for how you're going to work through these, right? And then you'll be like me and you'll start flipping through the textbook and say, okay, how many of these things do I need to do here, right? And as soon as you see code, I have to do that. And there's a lot of code in there, so we're going to have our hands full. Okay, but also what's really nice is once you have this kind of library of code, right, that you've worked through and that you feel relatively familiar with, then you have that at your disposal, right? You can use that in future projects. You can tweak it, you can change it, right? And you can kind of base stuff off of it, right? Without having to start from scratch. I don't want you to start from scratch. Okay. So chapter 1. Oh, and notice that I use this this LaTeX command /new page, which just puts it on a fresh page. So here, let's scroll through our PDF. Additional notes, and then here I have that /new page. Oh, sorry, it was totally lagging. See that now? So the /new page puts the chapter 1 exploratory data analysis on a new page. Now for you, I would probably copy and paste this into a new document, right? Because I had those setup instructions and you don't actually need that. You just need the chapter 1 stuff. So I would probably separate these, but for us to, and for me to explain everything I just wanted it in one file. Okay, so we're going to need to do a little bit of kind of cleaning up before we can get started and kind of setting stuff up. And so we're going to have to set things up in R as well as in Python. Okay, and so I've named my code chunks just so that I can jump around right into between my chunks. Hey, it's supposed to have the names of the code chunks. Anyways, that's okay. I thought it did, but I can't remember now. Sorry, just playing around. Okay, so chapter 1, exploratory data analysis, EDA. Courtesy of Tukey. Someone else would have come up with it, but he's the one who we attribute it to. Okay, and so here we're working in an R code chunk, and I named it R setup. Okay, so you could name it whatever you want, but it can't handle any spaces because then it thinks you're onto something else. And then what I said was I also added the option of message equals false, because a lot of these libraries, you'll get messages like, this function in dplyr is masked by this function in whatever package. And so doing message equals false means that it's not going to print those messages. So you could change it to true to see what the difference is. And that's how you're going to learn this stuff, right? If you change this to true, then what happens? And then I would recommend changing it back to false, because you don't want to see all those messages because they're not doing anything. Okay. So we're going to import the required packages. Now, what I want you to notice is, what have I done here? What did I do? If I go to the chapter 1 exploratory data analysis, I just copied all of this, right? And so what did I do? I copied importing the data sets. Okay, so I copied up to the estimates of location, which is the first one that we're going to do. And that's the one that we're going to work through together. And then I'll leave the rest for you to work on. Okay, and so here, it's tough because I'm so zoomed in. I want to be, but it makes it hard to see. So notice that this is all just pasted in from that file. And that's the end of that code chunk. Oh, it's because it's all. One thing, so if it's calling on a library that you don't have installed, then RStudio is going to tell you to install it or ask you if you want to, and then you do, and then you're all set. Okay. So then to import the data sets, the code in that code file that you have looks like this, right? So it's got the path name, so PSDS path, practical statistics for data scientists, sorry, path, PSDS. That's the name that they gave it. You could give it some other name, but it might be really tedious to find and replace all those. You can use the shortcut, but it can get a little bit dicey. Okay, so here, this is the general code. This isn't going to do anything because it's just the file path of the directory name and then the directory name of the get working directory. And so this code doesn't mean anything. right? It doesn't mean anything to your computer. It's just a general chunk of code. Okay, so here I've added a note that says set your path to your working directory. Okay, like I said, and I showed you, I saved this RMD file. And let's say here, this RMD file, I saved it with the master download. And so that's going to be my working directory, right? So what that means is that, let me go back here. This is what I'm calling the master file, the practical statistics for data scientist master. That's what I'm calling the master file. Makes sense? So because this is where my exploratory data analysis lab RMD file is, that's what makes this my working directory. Okay. And so what I have to do is I have to tell it that, okay, this is my working directory. This is where you're going to find the file, but also the data files, because that's how we're going to import the data. Okay, so we're going to define the path. So I use the same name because that's what it uses later on. Notice here in the read.csv file, it says go to the path that I told you to use, and then go to the data folder and then grab the state.csv. So we're defining this path right now. So the file.path of, and then I know that it's different on a PC versus a Mac, but if you set the working directory to be where you save the file, and then you type in get working directory. So here, get working directory, like that. I guess I haven't set my path yet, so it doesn't know that that's my working directory, but that's, I guess, my default, my files. So that's okay. But once you've set your working directory, how do you do that? Now it's kind of hard for me to see here. Oh, because there's a huge bar in the way. Okay, so to set your working directory, you go to session and then set working directory. And if you have the file opened from where you want it to be, so if you are in your working directory and your file's there, then you can just set it to the source file location. Notice when I click that, then it produces the destination, right? Or where it's going to. Okay. Now I'm gonna move that bar again. Okay, and so that's what I copied, and that's what I pasted here into the file path. Lots of ways you could do it, but what you can do is you can run this code individually outside of knitting. So I'm going to run these libraries just so I have them. And these are the messages that we've suppressed. Okay. So now, if I run this PSDS path, this whole chunk of code, and I'm going to use the shortcuts, then I've defined the path. Okay. How I check to see if this is working is I try to create a state data set. Okay. And so notice here, I only have A because I made an A earlier, and then I have the path. Okay. So that it knows what to do. And so if I run this state line, so I've got it on the line that I want to run, and then Command Enter or Control Enter, then notice it knew what to do, right? And so I told it to, okay, state is going to be if you read the CSV, which is at the file path of PSDS path, which I just defined, that huge chunk, and then go to the data folder, and give me the state.csv file. Okay, so it's got this kind of incremental grab the file. What's nice, and what you'll notice is if I move all these data sets, then all I need to do is I need to change the file path, right? And that's really nice because then I have this generic path that I can change just once, and then I can update this whole file. Sorry. Just like a tickle in my throat. Anyways, so annoying. So then what I've done is, or what we will do is we're going to go through and we're going to bring in all these data sets. And so they look wonky, or they look kind of shifted because one, I changed it so that when I knitted, there was nothing chopped off, but also because now I'm zoomed in to show you guys, it looks a little bit wonky, but that's okay. So now I'm running all this, and it's just importing all these data sets. Hasn't done it yet. It hasn't worked through them all yet, but we'll see them all appear up here in the environment tab once it's done. Okay. I guess it was a bigger ask than I wanted to do, but that's okay. Okay. So it looks like it's all set. So now I have all these data sets that I can use, and these I can use in the console here, right? So they're just ready to work with. Okay. Next up, I found that the easiest way, or at least for me, because I'm so unfamiliar with Python, was I understood that I had to install some packages, right? I have to install some packages that I don't have yet. And the easiest way for me to do that was to do that through R. Okay, and so that's how I've done it. There's probably way fancier ways of doing it, but that's okay. So what I have is, because Python works the same way, I only have to install these packages once, and then I can just use them. So that's nice. So what I did was I made an R code chunk with the Python library install. I guess it's installs because it's more than one. And then I use the eval equals false. What does the eval equal false do? It's going to make it so that it shows the R code in my PDF, but it doesn't evaluate it, right? So it doesn't do anything. Oh yeah, you guys. So you've got the command line options in the chat, but this is how I found the least scary way to do it. Okay. So I did have to call on the reticulate library, which assumes that you have it installed. Otherwise, you'd have to do that. I know you're pip3, and then I think it might look, is it pip3? Was that for PC or for Mac? I think it was a slightly different, but anyways, it doesn't matter. So here you can avoid the terminal altogether. So with, oh yeah, so install the Python packages. This only needs to be done once, right? So you have to run it once outside of knitting, and then once you have it, you're done. Okay. Nice. So then you have to do the py.install pandas, the numpy, the scipy, stats models, wquantile, seaborn, and the matplotlib.pylab. What a long name. Anyways, so you'd have to install all of these, but once you've done that, then you don't need to do that again. Okay. And one thing that I use a lot is the mass commenting. Okay, so for example, if I want to make sure that I do not run this again, I would have to comment it out, right? And so here, this is a comment, it only needs one, but in our studio, you can highlight everything that you want to comment. And then on a Mac, it's similar, I'm sure. Now it's so second nature, I have to think about what it is. It's Control or Command Shift C. Okay. And then to uncomment, you can do the same thing. So Control Shift C or Command Shift C, and you're back and you're working at it again. Okay. So sometimes I like to comment stuff out, and that's my biggest complaint about Markdown, is that if you work in LaTeX, then you can comment stuff out and you can have big chunks of text that maybe you're saving for later or whatever. And we can't do that in Markdown. So that's my one complaint so far of Markdown, but I'm sure I'll have more. Okay, so make sure that you install those. And then we'll go through the Python setup. Okay, so the Python setup, I did the exact same thing, right? And so I copied all of this down to the estimates of location, okay? Because our Python brain needs to do the same thing. We have to import all the libraries that we're going to use, and we have to import the data sets that we're going to use, right? And so we need to do everything twice. Okay, so then I copied all this and I pasted it into a Python code chunk. So notice it looks the same. And so let's see here. Oh yeah, so this is how I determined what libraries I should install, is because I looked at the pandas, the numpy, the scipy stats, the stats models. Notice that this is the same list as we did earlier. And then here, I didn't work too much at this. I didn't worry too much about it because it just seemed to do something. If I were you, I'd probably try to figure out what this is doing. But for now, it looks like it's saying, okay, your data is going to come from this data directory. Okay. Oh yeah, define paths to data sets. If you don't keep your data in the same directory as the code, adapt the path names. Now, I would encourage you to keep all the data where it is so that you can just grab it and use this code. If you move it, you'll have to fix that. Okay, and so that's what that's saying. And I only have it spaced out because when I knitted it, then it went off the page and I didn't want that. So then here, airline stats CSV is going to be in the data folder, which we've defined, and then it's the airline stats.csv file. Okay, so both of these are referring to what? In our working directory, which is this master file that we downloaded, it's referring to the data folder, right? So it's saying, okay, from this RMD file, now in the same location, find the data folder and then go grab this CSV that I need. Okay, so they both work the same way, but they do it slightly differently. Okay. Oh, I see I have a little double capital there. The first example that the textbook works through is location estimates, right? So the mean, the median, the trimmed mean, the weighted mean, all those fun things. And so we're using the population and murder rates from the state data. Okay. So the state data, if we look at it, we have the name of the state, we have the population, which is, it's storing as an integer, which it is, right? You can't have a half a person. And so it should be an integer, but that's a numerical variable, right? And then the murder rate, which is here, it's numerical, and that's good because it can be a decimal because it's a rate. And then the abbreviation is a character, which is also just the categorical variable with one observation in each category, which is kind of boring. So we're going to focus on the population and the murder rate. And we're going to talk about the mean and the median and just the measures of center or location for these two variables. We're going to start with the R code. Okay. Again, what did I do here? Well, oh, I forgot. My R code is in RStudio already. Sorry, let it catch up. So I went here, and now I'm on to estimates of location. Right? Just to get the ball rolling, what I want you to do is just grab the estimates of location all the way up to estimates of variability, because that's for the next little section, I guess. Okay, so then you would copy this. Notice it's not that much. And I've copied it into this R code chunk. I'm not 100% sure on why they use this double square bracket notation. I have to look into it. I don't know why they would, but I guess that's okay. Instead of changing it, I'm going to just say, okay, well, I understand what this means, right? So here, what are we doing? State underscore ASC is assigned to state, which we've already imported, which is, so now state ASC is going to be a duplicate of state. Okay, and we do that often, right? We assign it to some. If I'm going to manipulate a data set, instead of manipulating the original data set, I would duplicate it as a data set with a slightly different name, right? So that's what we've done here. So state underscore ASC is a data set. And then what it looks like and what we're doing is when I use these double square brackets of population, which is the name of the column, then it's just accessing the population column of that data set. Now, typically, I would use something like state ASC $ population. It doesn't want to do it though. Oh, I guess state ASC. I guess I have to, what's my problem? I haven't made state ASC yet, that's why. So if I run that, now I have state ASC, and what I'm gonna do is I could do state ASC, and I could use the population $ population. Yeah. And it would be the same thing as this, but I am not interested in going through and changing all these. And so I'm just willing to say, okay, well, I understand that they're the same. So I would have used this notation probably, but the double square brackets is also fine. So it's going to be assigned to a format format equals D. I can't remember what that stands for, but digits is 0. And we've got a couple of other arguments is the word I'm looking for. Okay. And then we made a table. So then here, I'm gonna run that. To change the population. Now it's a character, I guess. And now I'm gonna look at a table of rows 1 through 8 of state ASC, which is our first step, right? So that's gonna be that first table that we have in the textbook. Now, I'm more interested in the mean and the median and all that fun stuff. So if I take the mean of the population, then I get 6162876. Yeah. Now, instead of going to, so here I have the trimmed mean, here I have the median, right? It's pretty obvious what's happening here. Then I find the weighted mean, and then I find the weighted median, right? Instead of going through and doing all those together in our code, what I would do is, if I were you, is I would make little subsections. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean by that. So instead of having the Python code and then the R code, I would have, and I just went through and I wrote out all the sections that you have to do. Okay. But I would do 1, 2, 3, 4, because I can't remember the subsections that I had, but let's do this. So the mean. The mean is the average. And is the most common location estimate, right? Especially for distributions that are approximately normal. That's a note to myself, right? Because now I can kind of use that and having to look that up. So that's just off the top of my head. I'm sure the textbook has a more eloquent definition, but what I would do here is, if you don't have your shortcuts ready, then you can insert a new R code chunk or insert a new Python code chunk. Okay, so that's using this little plus code chunk, or there's obviously shortcuts as well. But if I insert an R code chunk, then what I'm going to have, if I grab this, copy, or you could cut it, so you could just move it, but I'm too scared to do that right now. I want to have it till I'm sure I'm ready to let it go. And then the Python code chunk doing the same thing is what? Where is it? Oh yeah, so here's the table. I'm going to skip ahead. Okay, it looks the same. So we take the state data set, and then I want to print the state.head of the 8 first things in there, and it should look the exact same. But what I want to do is I want to read I'm going to copy this into my Python code chunk. Okay. So now, if I run these two, of course. Oh, dang it. I have to do, I didn't run this code chunk here. This Python setup needs to be run. And unfortunately, it takes a little while. While that's thinking, right? Because I hadn't imported the libraries. I had installed them earlier, but I didn't import them for this session, so that's okay. So then if I go to our Python code, I'm going to skip that table, even though you could consider if you want to. But then if I'm working on the mean, then I can do the R code and I can go look at the Python code. That's going to make it a lot easier to look and compare the two, or look at and compare the two. So if I use the mean in R, right, versus the mean in Python, so here I'm going to run this. I notice that I get slightly different answers, right? 6162876 versus 6162876.3. Okay. Notice that we get a slightly different value in Python, right? Or R if you prefer. Find a way to change the R code to match the Python output. Okay, so that's what I want you to think about. I assure you that they are doing the same thing, and there will be times where maybe they use different methodologies, okay, to get the answers. But in this case, it's you're going to be able to find the solution. And so here, when you're working through it, right, you would probably put the solution, right? Notice that we get slightly different value in Python. How we change it to match is by doing this, right? And so then you're writing it out, kind of explaining everything as you go. Okay. So then here, these are all the little cutoff chunks, and you can organize it in any way that you want, but I just wanted you to have a little checklist of all the things in chapter 1 that you need to do. Okay, and so just do the same thing for each of these little chunks and work through and kind of dissect them and really get to know these. And remember, you are allowed to work as a group, and I encourage it. And I know I'm way out of time, so I'll update the RMD file in the PDF that's posted on Moodle and let you poke around in there and see what happens. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I am going to stop this recording. I'm stopping it anyways.